right, I'm going to come closer. I feel very distant to you all. Mayor, I feel like I should kick off with you. When you hear a topic phrase like the future of Calgary, what immediately comes to mind in terms of both the opportunity but also the challenge?
I think it's telling the story of who Calgary is right now that's important to talking about what we can become. And I think we've let too many people tell the story for us for too long. And it's about time that we started getting more diverse voices, sending the signal of who we are as a city. We're the third most diverse city in the nation, and people have no clue. And the type of work we do here, the type of people we have here, it all matters. So that's what I want to do, is get the word out about who we are so we can talk about what the future holds.
Megan, I'm watching you nod. I know this is something you were very passionate about when we spoke the other day. The brand of Calgary, the story that's being told by Calgarians, but also about Calgary by other people. Can you want to expand on that?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I think in our business of selling Calgary and promoting the quality of life, excuse me, and the opportunity. Just grab the water. Of course, in the first statement.
Hey, it happens, it's all good.
The brand of Calgary seems to be a lot of what other people say it is, and we need to change that. We need to take much more ownership of telling our own narrative, and I think for people in the community, being ambassadors for the community, we have so much to be proud of and so much to share. And we need to kind of take ownership over that. So I 100% agree. And the diversity piece that the mayor mentioned is a real asset for us, that we need to start leveraging the diverse voices and ideas and people from around the world that are here. And I think a lot of people don't realize that we have that as part of our community.
Absolutely. Graeme, you talk to me about this all the time. You're so passionate about this city and its future, but you're also a really big believer that there's more courage and more vision needed. Can I ask you to explain on why those two values are so important to you?
Yeah, I mean, I've got to say that I moved to Calgary 15 years ago, and Michelle and I, when we started Energy Disruptors with yourself and Rachel, we were just blown away by the generosity of the community. There's so many fantastic entrepreneurs in the city. We've had incredible corporate support, and I think you can feel that at this event, there's just such a great atmosphere, and there's a lot of kind of, I'm going to get all soppy right now, but there's kind of love in the room, right? You can just feel there's a lot of great energy. But one of the things that I have noticed is you've also got this other side to the city where I think, we're sometimes almost fixated on some of the negative things. And what I'd like to see is this kind of North Star in terms of where are we going as a city in the future. And one of the things that I'm so passionate about is about how do you make an impact and how do you get people excited about solving some of the world's biggest challenges. So the reason why we started this event was we wanted to accelerate solutions to some of the world's biggest energy problems. We wanted to inspire people to lean into this challenge that we have around climate and around energy. And I believe that Calgary can be the capital of impact entrepreneurship, of solving the world's major energy, major food, and major water challenges. So that bigger North Star, I think, is really important in terms of where we're going.
So I want to expand and touch on what it's going to take to get there, to realize a vision like that. And Apoorv, when we were chatting the other day, you were speaking about the fact there's so many great skill sets and expertise here in this city, but there's a real risk aversion when it comes to backing early stage, when it comes to backing different and new. I'd love for you to expand on what you've seen in your experience.
Yeah. I think generally that's just a Canadian trait, though. It's not Calgary-focused. But yeah, I think one of the things that as a nation and definitely as a city and a culture, there's a lot of innovation at the early stage. But we talk about valleys of death all the time, right? Like there's the early concept, you got to prove that out, then you got to move out of the lab, and then you got to move out into the field and sell product. And depending on who you talk to, they'll always have different kind of versions of valleys of death, and each one of those valleys can kill you. But I think what happens with Canadians is they stop like right before the third valley of death, which is where you have to take it to market, really scale and take a risk and say, we know where we need to be in 2050 or 2030, why don't we start making that move now? And generally speaking, for a clean tech company or a carbon utilization company like us, what we've seen is a huge amount of kind of Canadian innovation, Calgary-based innovation. I mean, Calgary is a leader in carbon utilization and some of those areas related to circular economy. What we need to do in the city is take this all the way out. And so if we want this to be a made-in-Calgary solution from concept all the way out to the field, like where you show that it actually makes sense, and there's societal, commercial, economic buy-in, we shouldn't let the Americans kind of take a couple of those boxes. Like we should keep those things here. And I think there's a huge opportunity to do that. Like we probably in Calgary have more of an entrepreneurial mindset than we do in kind of the bigger cities out east. I'm imagining if we're the third most diverse city, like Winnipeg and Saskatoon are number 1 and 2, but I'm kidding. Like, I think generally speaking,
I got that.
I'm not that illiterate about Canadian population, but yeah, I just do think that there is a niche that we can carve out, and I think hosting global events like this or having the community of the city like pull other people and gravitate people towards the city, I think is something that we can really get excited about.
I want to come to David in a moment on what he's seeing happen in innovative global cities more broadly, but Mayor and Megan, I'd love to get your views on that piece around risk takers, preparedness to back new and different. Do you see that as a challenge that Calgary has to overcome, and what are the points of light that you're seeing in that as well? Yeah?
I think something that's fascinating is that we're entrepreneurs, we're go-getters, we've got that can-do spirit. We hear all this stuff all the time, yet there's a lot of people with a lot of money in this city that are really hesitant to invest in clean tech. So, okay, let's demonstrate that we believe in the people that are leading the sector in transformation. So if we are really going to be an energy city, and being an energy city involves a future that is rooted in transformation, then let's be the ones to lead that. So the amount of capital that we have sitting here that is hesitating to invest in new ideas and new technologies, that worries me. And I think it's because we've become so polarized. So you either support the energy sector or you don't. And it's not like that. We know we're in the midst of transformation. The energy sector themselves have told us that. So let's step up and start investing locally.
Absolutely. Megan, do you want to add in?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I was thinking of to build on that is, we really need to be ourselves and our best version of ourselves. In the business we do in economic development, we hear, statements like, are you trying to be Silicon Valley of Canada and Silicon Valley of the North? We have a very unique story to tell in Calgary and in Alberta. And I think we really want to build on the strengths that we already have. And we have a tremendous legacy and history and strengths, our people, our assets, obviously our natural resources. And to Graeme's point, the economic strategy for Calgary, that vision is to be the place where bright minds and big ideas come together with an unmatched spirit to solve global problems. And I think that's a tremendous North Star. It really speaks to this event and the conversations we've been having here. And I think that's what we're really good at. And not only can we solve those global problems for ourselves and our country, that's an opportunity then to export that know-how and technology like what Apoorv is doing to the world. That's what we're good at. That's what we should double down on, and we should be really, really proud. And energy is only a part of the story. Of course, a lot of those applications and solutions around global problems are around feeding the world and moving the world as well and healing the world in other major sectors. So obviously, I'm very proud of what we're doing. It's just a matter of telling a different narrative, for sure.
David, I love just first your response to the conversation you've already heard going on around the panel. Any thoughts?
So I think there are two things that matter a lot when you think about the future of a town or an area, and it's really just talent and culture. How can you attract the best talent? How can you keep the best talent? But having the best talent isn't enough. You also have to create this culture of innovation where people can take risks, where people understand that even the successes in the past do not necessarily mean success in the future unless you adapt and change. And adapting and changing means that you have to have humility so that you're still curious, because curiosity equals intelligence. And intelligence is what allows you to make all good decisions.
I'm interested for the people's response to that, because there's two parts to that equation. How well do we think Calgary's going on the skills attraction and retention piece? And then there's that cultural piece around actually unleashing that diversity of thought and thinking, making it a safe place that emboldens and encourages people to show up and solve, some of the world's most pressing problems. Any of the panelists want to jump in on that?
Talent.
Sorry, Megan. I think it's so critical, because again, one of the things that's really struck a chord with me at this summit, we've talked so much about social transition and about how important it is to bring people along that journey. And often, I think in this city, we tend to beat to death the technological pathways, the costs around different aspects of our energy future. But the thing that has been a through line from day one all the way through to the close of the summit is about culture, mindset, openness, continuous learning, the ability to pivot and have resilience. And so I think, again, it's kind of an excellent point, David, in terms of these are the pieces we need to be thinking about as a culture and with respect to the city.
Any other comments from the panel?
You know, I think we've started building a culture that accepts the fact that change is a good thing, and we've attracted the talent. I think it's important for leaders to really demonstrate that we are an inviting place. And I can tell you from my own perspective, I was a week into the job when I held roundtables with all kinds of industry sectors who had never been to City Hall before. So if you don't see yourself in your leadership, how do you feel that you belong to a wider community? So I absolutely feel it's my job, it's council's job, and I think it's all elected officials' jobs to sit down with the business sector and talk about what's important to them and help create that culture. Because it can't be done without leadership. And I think maybe that's the thing that we haven't done so well. We've been so focused on, you know, land use bylaws and budgets and processes and policies that we forgot about the people. So I'm just excited to bring people back into the mix.
I was going to ask you the role of public officials, and you've touched on it there in terms of, you know, who you're bringing around the table, who's involved in decision making. Is there anything you want to add, though? Because it's been a through line that's run through EDU, policymakers, regulators, politicians. They're often named in the context of people flagging it as the challenge that needs to be overcome or the problem that needs to be solved for. Anything else you want to add around the role that policymakers and government officials have in not just the future of Calgary, but maybe broadly in the energy transition?
Yeah, I would say probably two things. First is we meet with a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds, representing a lot of different industries, organizations, social causes, and it's our responsibility to connect the dots between those things. So, for example, measuring success of tourism right now is tied to room nights, and that's it. That's the criteria. I think it needs to be much broader than that. What about, you know, people in seats at attractions or festivals? That's got to be a measure as well. And, you know, let's get past the way we've always done things. So if you're not sitting down with, you know, the gaming sector, you're not realizing what you could be bringing to the city in terms of tourism and conventions and the attractions that go along with that. And I always go back to, you know, examples like there was a Fortnite competition in New York, and Marshmallow was the star attraction. So you put gaming and music together and all of a sudden it's a big deal. But when your policymakers are, you know, old, for lack of a better word, they don't get it, right? And so, you know, we think of conventions as being the Lions Club, and we don't think beyond the words that we've learned. Conventions is a problematic word because it's focused on convention, and we need to go back, you know, and be innovative when we're doing things like that. So I think I went completely off topic, but we have the ability to connect the dots on lots of different people, and we need to not be stuck in policy. We need to challenge it as much as we can and be nimble and responsive to what people are asking for.
Yeah, go for it, Paul.
I'll just add one piece to that, which is, you know, so when I first moved to Calgary, so I moved here a few years after you. I've been here 11 years now. And I did my undergrad in Atlanta, like Georgia, you know, the Southern Belt, conservative kind of mindset and philosophy. And so even when I came here, like got into the oil field service sector, and what you keep hearing is the government just needs to get out of the way. We know how to solve this, just go away and we'll sort this out. I think that's a very not productive mindset. I think what needs to happen is that collaboration that you're talking about, Mayor, because I think generally speaking, more and more as we've started understanding the challenges of energy transition, at least in our space of like low carbon construction materials or circular economy concepts around CO2, I think what we're realizing is that there is a mandate for a company, however big or small, to be essentially a good spokesperson for what those challenges are and being able to relay that, I suppose, to the policymakers so that they can make informed decisions. Because if we're not able to convey that over to you and say, this is why, don't just go by what you see online on a website, you will not make those right decisions. So I think there is that piece of, you know, getting over that mindset. You picked on old people, so maybe I'll pick on young people for a sec. And just say, like, I think there is a little inexperience with, like, the millennials in general, I would say, about how change happens, especially in difficult problems like energy and low carbon materials and things like that. So I think being able to kind of gain that experience through collaboration, where we don't have this polarizing kind of mindset thinking the government's just trying to slow us down, or big corporations aren't going to try to help. I think we have to look at this more collaboratively and just say, if we can work together and really convey the nuances, we can effectively, broadly make more effective decisions and hopefully speed the pace of change.
To stay there for a moment, you mentioned, sometimes there's maybe some naivety amongst the young people. We've got at least 300 university students here, and certainly a lot more young people more broadly in the room. What do you want them to hear, or what have you learned in your experience to date about what it takes to make change in this city with the people alongside you?
Well, I'll go back to your previous session. I think when Aaron was talking about there's no Superman, I think there is a whole amount of hope right now with people coming just out of university or high school and stuff, thinking we've got this. We just need to stay at it and we'll figure this out. And the fact is, I was at an investor conference in California last week, and one of the main guys in carbon utilization basically started his panel by saying, this is not inevitable. This could go really badly wrong, and everyone needs to step up and say, this is the part I want to play. So I think taking ownership of that agency and really saying, not believing everything you see and hear on either side, and just being evidence-based and trying to be proactive about getting involved would be kind of my suggestion.
David, I wanted to ask you, you've just heard both speakers there talk about the importance of collaboration. You have a great global perspective on this Calgary conversation coming from outside, but having looked at some of the world's most innovative cities. What do you see as a pattern amongst cities that do this really well? What are the features of it?
I think there's two things. One, so it's fantastic to have the diversity of thinking, but the diversity of thinking is not worth any value if you're not having a lot of conversations. So if you look at the cities that are some of the most innovative in the world, and they're spread, it's a complete variety going from Singapore to Copenhagen to Tel Aviv, what you see is these conversations happening in places like this, but the conversations are creating these ideas, creating the connectedness, and then allowing all of this creation. So that, I think, is half of it. The other half is many countries in the world have chosen a path where they think very, very long term, which most people think is an extreme advantage. But it's actually the emergent strategies that tend to do better. In other words, being adaptive, which I think probably Darwin taught us 100 or 200 years ago, is far more important than actually trying to think of what the long-term strategy is. As valuable as it feels, the truth is that the winner always goes to the ones that are adaptive and can take opportunities when they see them and change course and move. And that is a very different kind of execution that most managers, I think, are taught.
Jump in, Graeme.
Yeah, I think one of the other things, just when we're picking up on what Apoorv was saying about collaboration, there's the optics of collaboration, and there's true collaboration. And it's really important to understand the difference. So as you would imagine, over the last 5-6 years since we launched this, we've worked with thousands of different stakeholders. And that took us a couple of years to basically figure that out. It might sound a bit crass, but who's wasting our time, and who are we actually leaning into and going, right, they actually truly want to collaborate. And I think we're also seeing this gap between action and words as well. And how do we close that gap? And what I would say to a lot of the young leaders in this audience, particularly young leaders who are working for major corporations in this city, is we need to hold these leaders to a higher standard, and we need to see that gap closed in terms of true action around some of these major challenges. And again, what I'm hoping is that you're going to walk away from the summit inspired to truly collaborate, not just the optics of collaboration, and also to lean into action rather than just words.
Megan, anything to add for you? Importance of collaboration?
Yeah, I was just thinking of some examples that kind of tie collaboration as well as the role of government, right? And I know the mayor hasn't said it yet, so I'm going to say it, but the city made an investment in Avatar Innovations in the Energy Transition Center in downtown Calgary. So you see this, physical space, the meeting of the minds between government, entrepreneurs, in many different subsectors of energy and beyond eventually with post-secondary, and really seeing that kind of come to life. And I think that starts again to change the narrative of how we're doing things differently in Calgary, and an invitation to people that don't have the experience yet, to the students, to the new immigrants into the city, that this is a place that you can come in, we want to collaborate with you, we want to work with you, and agree that that's a good example, I think, Graeme, of that action. And there's more examples like that that have been mentioned over the last few days, but I think that's a really tangible one that we're seeing here in the community that's received a lot of great support and want to see more of.
But it's also about being bold. So I think we need to be bolder in terms of what we're trying to do as a city. And again, it's going to inspire people around what's possible. We need to think bigger, not to beat up on the stampede, maybe a little bit. But when we think we're building this incredible world-class asset, it's $500 million investment in this city, but sometimes we miss the opportunity to connect this world-class infrastructure up with transit, or how are we adding amenities to this site and actually creating a truly world-class asset for the future of this city. We need to make sure we're not building white elephant infrastructure, and we've got to, again, I think, be more joined up in our thinking and bolder about what we're trying to do as a city.
Speaking of bold, I think we've got a bit of a reputation, I like to think, I hope we have a reputation for not shying away from the uncomfortable parts of conversations. Almost all of you, in talking to me in advance, talked about the challenge of the political status quo right now. Alberta politics, Calgary politics, the reality of that. So picking up what Erin talked about, this idea of, nothing changes until you change. Let's start with the question inward. What does Calgary need to change in its disposition, its approach, in order to create a more productive outcome for Calgary? Mayor, I might probably come to you on that one first.
Apparently, if you are bold, you capture headlines. So I don't know if anyone remembers me saying we need to declare a climate emergency. A lot of people kind of lit themselves on fire over that, but to me, it was table stakes. But it was a move that nobody else had made. Our prior council was, I will say this, afraid to do so. And so when you are unafraid and you start these provocative conversations, you throw yourself in a firestorm too. And right now, the world is a place where everything is off kilter and everything's unpredictable, and the attacks that come at you are terrifying. And you don't know where the attack or the threat is going to come from. So it's not easy to be unafraid and be bold right now. But if more of us do it, and we stand with people who do it, we'll be okay. But I would say that right now, in this sort of unpredictable time, people don't want to go out on a limb and say something, but you have to. And as elected officials in particular, we have to say the things that need to be said. We can't hide behind policy anymore. We have to be the ones that are standing with people that are demanding change, or we become part of the problem.
Apoorv, do you want to jump in?
Well, I do remember when you declared the climate emergency. I think that was the first thing you did, or at least in the first day or two, right?
Surprise.
I mean, yeah, what's interesting is I can tell you from the grassroots level that a month later, we had one of the big construction, concrete companies call us because of that, saying, hey, we really want to speed up our work with you because we think this is real this time. And I think what's interesting is, I think that was going to happen at some point, but I am convinced that happened earlier because of that. And now the question, we actually had a few City of Calgary engineers on our site yesterday, and we're talking about, okay, now what do we do? So figuring out the how. But I think to your point, I think the power of that signal is so important, because when you send that signal out, or to your point, Megan, about the investment into Avatar, I think those are things where I think if you're intentional about putting those out there so that people know you're being serious, it goes a long, long way. And to your point about not just seeming like you're collaborating or seeming like you're encouraging things, but actually doing it. I can definitely say that the construction industry, which is what we're focused on, they really need to see proof in the ground before they do anything. And so that kind of stuff goes a long way. Rhetoric doesn't usually.
Megan, you look like you want to jump in there.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to build on that a little bit with the city's recent resilience plan, right? Economic, climate, and social. And again, we talk a lot about being a community of the and, right? We need all three. And I can tell you in our business of attracting people, capital, and talent to Calgary, this matters a lot. This positioning, this action that follows, the right time, the right message. We've lost investment opportunities because they didn't feel this was a community that was values aligned. I read a report recently, Canada West Foundation talked to Albertans that live in Vancouver and Toronto about Alberta, and they have strong climate values, and they said, I don't feel like I belong. I can't build a career in Calgary. We can't afford that. We need that talent to be looking at Calgary and those smart people to be wanting to be here. So I think that's really important. I know that was something that we were very supportive of. And again, that resilience plan that just came out just furthers emphasizes the focus on the and.
Graeme?
Yeah, I'm going to call out probably two things that I think are important as well. The role of the big corporates in the city and also the post-secondary institutions as well. We have seen a tremendous difference between certain actors in this city. I can give you an example. One of the PSCs I've met with probably 20 times over the last 5 years, trying to bring students to this event. I offered them 50 or 100 free tickets for their students, and they couldn't get that through the various committees and approvals with all their different 20 frickin' faculties. And you can imagine I almost was bawled after that process, right? It was super frustrating. But on the other hand, there's another PSC in this room who have 100 students here who are an absolute dream to work with. So I think we need to challenge some of these institutions in this city to step up and be more nimble and innovative. And again, I come back to this true collaboration piece. The other piece on the big companies, there's a lot of big sponsors in this room. Most of the city's largest employers are heavily involved in this event. Again, we see a tremendous variation between how they show up. We have some groups who are incredibly nimble. They pay us on time, which is really useful.
That helps.
Yeah? And then we have some other groups that they say to me, Graeme, we need you to fill out this 100-page supply chain form so that we can approve you to pay a $5,000 invoice. So what I want to see from the corporate sector, there's a lot of important corporate leaders in this room, look at your cultures, look at how you're collaborating with small and medium companies. There's a magical interface between these entrepreneurs and these major corporations. And I would challenge all of you, if you're aware of this in your own companies, act as internal disruptors. You can make a difference. I was sobbing on the front row last night watching David's talk, and one of the things that really lit a fire under me in terms of that conviction and being bold and being willing to speak up. So I would again say that if you're sitting with a PSE here and you know I'm talking about you, good or bad, and same with the companies in the room, please take that away, because we can make a tremendous difference in this city if we solve those two problems.
David, I want to come to you. Firstly, you can have a right of reply there. Oh yeah, go for it, absolutely. Love that.
You can tell I'm opinionated, sorry.
That's why we only got him on stage once. He's very opinionated. No, just kidding. Love it. More of it, Graeme, always. David, I do want to ask you, though, you deal with the state of politics around the world all the time, and you would look at it as a force as an enabler, obviously, for innovation. You would look at it as a detractor for innovation. I'm interested, the discussion around how dangerous a time it is to be outspoken and bold. How do we lean into that? Because it does feel like we're at a time where there's a polarization that actually threatens the very fabric of our communities. Just be intrigued for your thoughts and your global perspective on that.
Graeme and I were speaking about this actually just half an hour ago. How the world appears to be getting more and more polarized. And it's not just from the AI search engines that keep giving you more and more what you are looking for. But I think in each of us is a part of our brain that wants to categorize things. And so it'll do that incessantly, and it'll categorize. And the other part of it also will categorize, and then it will make one category good and one category bad. And then it'll put us almost always into the good category. And this creates an enormous amount of suffering in the world. suffering for ourselves, suffering for other people. And it's just a bad habit that the human brain has, that it's sort of inherited from a couple million years ago. But if we're aware of that, if we're aware that this brain likes to categorize and make one good and make one bad and stick us in it, and that always results in suffering, if we're aware of that, we do it so much less. And when we can stop doing it, we can stop judging. We can stop putting people into these categories that we don't want to be in. And then when we speak our word, we're not speaking from a judgmental tone. We're speaking from a tone then of the only thing that's left when you remove the suffering, which is a tone of compassion. I mentioned yesterday the sort of 5 regrets of the dying that Bronnie Ware had spoken about. And one of those regrets, the 5 most common regrets that people had when they were dying, was that they didn't speak what was on their heart. Imagine that, getting to the end of your life and thinking that you didn't speak what was on your heart, and that ends up being one of the 5 greatest regrets of your life. So there is no global impact from silence. We need to speak up, and we need to speak up from compassion.
Mayor, I'm watching you nod, but it also strikes me that that idea of the diversity and inclusion we spoke about earlier, that need to box people, that judgment before we've even got out of the blocks, I mean, that's inherently problematic to any aspirations we might have around diversifying leadership, conversation, representation in society more broadly, the inclusiveness of spaces. I'd just be intrigued for your thoughts on that.
It's fascinating to me how, as you have just put it, we have this need to place people in tidy little categories, and the brain does it over and over again. As someone who's an elected official who does not side with partisan politics, I don't find that I have a home with any party, frankly. You can't explain that to people. They think you're lying. So if you say, I don't align to the left or the right, I am squarely in the center, because that's where I believe the bulk of people actually are, and that's where I believe good, sound decisions get made, and I think that's how you steady society. People don't want to believe it. It's beyond their ability to spend more than 30 seconds evaluating and then categorizing. We've become a society where you've got 30 seconds to get somebody's attention, and you better tell them exactly what they want to hear. At the doors, here's a great example. So are you left or right? I don't know, what does that mean? Well, are you a liberal or are you conservative? I'm neither. You're lying. You can't get people past that cycle. So I think, and I can't remember who said, we need to have more dialogue, we need to have more discussions, and we need to engage in meaningful conversations. We do. We've lost the art of discussing and debating things. And one of my favorite things that's just happened this week at City Council, I know you all watch this, so you probably know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, we were all there, weren't we?
We had a strategic meeting of council, which is typically done in closed session. We did it all in public.
Cool.
All of it. All the ugly things that we needed to say to each other and about the way that we wish to grow this city, we had to do it publicly. And that was sort of this forced decision. But I'll tell you, we treated each other with respect. Nobody got into arguments with each other. We did debate. There were some heavy debates. But we came away with a 14-1 decision on how this city should grow.
Wow.
And we learned a lesson that you can have good dialogue.
Yeah. And it lines up with something we've heard a number of times on the stage this week too, the relationship between trust and transparency, and the criticality of both to innovation and being able to move forward. Apoorv, I want to come to something that you touched on when I spoke with you the other day, because we've talked about a lot of the things that all we would like to see shift and believe could make a powerful difference to the future of Calgary. You and I also spoke about the importance of mobilising faster. Apoorv shared with me a really scary stat that I'd not thought about in this frame, that we only have less than 35 quarters between now and 2030, which was sort of an alarmingly, when I framed it like that, I was like, wow, that feels very close. And you said that people are just not mobilising fast enough, the change isn't happening quickly enough. What do you think needs to shift to enable that faster pace?
Yeah, I think David touched on this, but Graeme's example there of that group, who shall not be named, like the ossification of all our institutions, right? Like where decision making is so bureaucratic and tends to take time, even though there's consensus to move quickly. I think some of it boils down to the fact that we just need to acknowledge the fact that this energy transition kind of roadmap, even with, I mean, a lot of it's just to, pat each other's chests and say, like, we all have a net zero commitment. I'm from India originally, and our prime minister, like, is funding coal power plants while saying we're going to be, net zero by 2050. Like, that doesn't quite seem like it's going to happen. But one of the things I think that we just need to be careful about and just have an honest conversation about is what are those levers? I think Aaron talked about leverage as well. Like, where can we move more quickly? And what's really like the actual cost of failure? I mean, as an example, if you have 10 startups working in circular carbon or circular water or whatever it may be, if only 1 or 2 of them survive, if you look at this from a venture capital kind of perspective, like, that's a win for them. They expect 9 to fail. And as society, I mean, those 10 companies are still creating jobs. They're still creating, they're attracting capital towards a dynamic city. They're still attracting people that maybe, will have 4 years of wasted life on a startup, but then the second thing that they start is going to be better because they've gotten to know each other and started to work together. So I think our metrics generally, I think are also ossified as a result of the institutions. And I think going back to that 30-quarter thing, capital decisions in heavy industries, whether it be oil and gas, cement, steel, even fertilizers and things like that. I mean, you have to approve the capital budget now for something you want to build in 2024, 2025. And if you're talking about mega projects outside of, like, the way Texans can build refineries, everything else has to be approved at least 3 years ahead of time. And especially for clean tech, where a lot of these things are a first-of-a-kind installation. And so what's the harm? I mean, and again, I'm not trying to be frivolous, but there was just that news report about the Minnesota, like, COVID thing where, like, they spent, I don't even know, they said, like, a McDonald's franchise makes $2 million a year, and they charged the US federal government like $5 million for 1 month of meals they didn't even serve. I mean, if we can be that silly about allocation of capital, I mean, let's take risks where, like, if someone's claiming they're going to build something, you will be able to see if they build it or not. And if they don't, then it failed and you take it away. You'll always have to have ratchets and things like that. But I do think that we have to have a higher kind of affinity towards risk and perceive risk differently in the short term.
I want to grab everyone on this question because I think it's a really important one. What's it going to take for the pace change? Who wants to go next? Graeme?
Comes down to culture, really. At the end of the day, it comes down to being willing to change your culture. You talked about humility, David. Being willing to accept what we don't know. Being willing to show vulnerability. These are really important characteristics in order to and have these difficult conversations internally, whether you're in a large company or whether you're trying to form collaborations. I think that willingness to lean into that vulnerability, I think that's a critical piece in terms of transforming the culture. And not just the veneer of culture, the optics of culture, the actual true culture.
Megan, how about for you?
Yeah, and I mean, I would underpin that culture is underpinned by people, right? And so you think about the systematic biases built into our systems and our organizations. I think that has a huge impact on the speed at which things move, right? And so we talk a lot about in our work on behalf of the community is how are we integrating new voices, inviting different people to the table, evaluating people based on the skills, not the pathways that got them to where they are, so that we're really meaningfully engaging a lot of underrepresented groups. That is how this community will win, and that is really, really important, and it leverages the diversity that we started the conversation by talking about. So I think that's really important to both change the culture as well as move faster is just getting different voices and moving past the traditional a little bit, especially in industries here where we all know the stereotypes of the energy industry and the industry of my dad and my grandfather. This is not where we're going. And so we need different people there making the decisions.
David, how about for you? What's required for a pace change and mobilization?
I agree with both those points. Culture changes because they're individuals willing to take bold risks.
Perfect. That was succinct. Love it. And scene. No, Mayor, I'd love to get your view on that. What do you think it takes?
I want to go back to something that David said about people make long-range plans, but they forget that there's little tinkering along the way that, if you're adaptable and nimble and responsive. I think we also need to embrace people who are not linear thinkers. So we tend to create plans that are step 1, step 2, step 3, or if you do these things, this will be the result. And I think we need to embrace people, dare I say, like me, who are not linear thinkers. I have a goal, but my thought process exists in this series of blobs, if you will, where, I've got this sector floating out here, this person that I met over here, and this one, and this problem to solve, and I pull in the right people and the right pieces as needed to tackle whatever is before me, always realizing there's a goal at the end. But that's hard to explain. It's so much easier to be like my husband and have a Gantt chart and, have a clear plan. He's an engineer, by the way.
That is hard, right, when we've got linear processes. So it's interesting, there's a tension in that, isn't there, about how we can create space and challenge the way that we do things because it doesn't work for everyone.
Yeah, so I just think we need to embrace different ways of getting to a common goal.
All right, we've got only a couple of minutes remaining in our conversation, so what I would love to do, we've touched on a lot. There's a real sense of passion amongst this panel, and a real sense of belief, to be perfectly honest. I really get the sense, not only that every single person here, and David, we'd love to adopt you as a Calgarian too, but there's this sense that there's a desire to play a role in it, and that there is a real appetite for the challenge that lies ahead. What I would love you to finish on is an invitation to those sitting in the room. What do you invite them to go and do? How do you invite them to be a part of this? How do you invite them to link up with you and what you're working on? Apoorv, I might kick off with you.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, so we're a low carbon utilization company. We're trying to make pollution essentially a part of the solution as we work towards our net zero commitments and things of that sort. So yeah, like we started the company in Calgary. We're still headquartered here, will be for a long time. So yeah, if anyone's interested in that space around decarbonization, circular economy stuff, please reach out.
All right. Mayor?
I would say don't be afraid to challenge the status quo. Don't be afraid to call out something that you know is erroneous or is not going to take us further, because if you keep challenging those stereotypes and that convention, and you keep making your voice heard, and dare I say, you keep electing people like me who will then advance those ideas and speak up on your behalf, we will change the way the world views us, and our reputation will be the one it needs to be, which is we are still risk takers, we are still an inclusive place, you can still be successful here, but that is represented in many different ways.
David?
I would say that it is remembering our true potential. So it's an internal thing, not an external one. It's an internal thing where we sit and we just think in a quiet place and remember, am I really living my life to the potential that I could really be living it? Or is there something much greater that is in me and that somehow has been constrained? And how can I free that and really do something extraordinary?
Awesome, love that. Links back to, I've always got images when you talk, back to your presentation yesterday. It reminds me of that photo of the baby that you put up when you asked that question yesterday.
Yeah. Unlimited.
Megan.
Of course, I have to follow David. Very insightful. I'll come back to something I already said, but I truly believe it's really important, which is, we have to change the perception by changing the narrative. Every single one of us as individuals, our corporations, our schools, our nonprofits have a role in that. That's really important for the future of Calgary. And not only, sharing the stories and the narrative of all the things that are awesome, and of course the attributes that we all love to spew, but also the challenges we're facing and the invitation to the world to come in again and work with us. And that this is a place you feel welcome and belong, and we want to collaborate with you. So I think that's the role. We all have a role to be an ambassador for the place and to tell a different story and shape a different future for Calgary.
Awesome. Graeme?
I mean, I want Calgary to be the world's impact entrepreneurship capital over the next decade. So how do we shoot for that? How do we inspire people to lean into that? How do we get the institutions in this city to collaborate and be able to achieve that? How do we inspire the leaders in this room to take up that call to action? We really want to help with that. And one of the things that we want to do is we want to connect up the world's best thinkers and doers with the people here locally who are interested in that, in meeting that challenge head on. And in that process, we also want to build the world's best event that is a city-defining event for Calgary, so that when you think of Calgary in the future, one of the things you think of is this summit.
What an inspiring set of invitations to end on. Can you keep the applause going as I thank my panel, Apoorv, Mayor Gondek, David, Megan, and Graeme for their contribution to our conversation today and to the city.